have the sheet that's the volunteering. This says volunteer friendship on the top. And I copied this from a training that I got through Hospice Care Southwest Michigan. And this really helps us to distinguish the difference between volunteering and friendship. Because I think sometimes, as this states up here, as you work with residents or in any capacity of volunteering and you're dealing with other people, through time, you start developing a relationship with that person. And I know in hospice, as I would volunteer and get to know these residents, and then you start to see them deteriorate and then eventually die, there's a loss, okay? There's a big personal loss there. And after you go through that a few times, you start putting it in perspective. But this form is to really help you understand that when you volunteer, there's normally limits to it. And a friendship, a true friendship, is something that grows, okay, and continues to grow. And when you're working in this capacity, and if you go through each of those, it's sort of just to help you understand the difference, is that you really have to learn to separate yourself at some point. And the goal is to help this person become independent and self-sufficient. And it's not to say that as a result, if our resident becomes a fully devoted Christian, gets involved in the community, gets involved in the church, like we would hope they would, that you couldn't eventually have more of a friendship with them. But you really need to understand the difference when you're serving in the capacity. Beth was talking about an incident of manipulation. And in our church, we provide transportation to guys from KPEP at one of the facilities to our church on Sunday morning. And they become a part of our worshiping experience at our church. And we have picked up anywhere up to 15 of the guys and brought them to our church. And on Potluck Sunday, they're usually all there, the capacity van. But one of the things that we found, and I have volunteers that are drivers. I'm one of the drivers, but we have other volunteers that drive and go pick up the residents. And we've made them go through a little bit of training. But we have found that these guys love to manipulate our church because Christians like to do good things, don't we? And one of the things is we have a prayer request form, and they all are great about filling out prayer requests. But they have some pretty big needs when they indicate it on those. And our church wants to respond in an appropriate way. But what I've had to help our leaders, our volunteers know is that there are rules. As a volunteer for KPEP, we're supposed to be treated like staff. And they're not supposed to ask us for anything, okay? And we're not supposed to give them anything. So when they're asking for shoes and boots and whatever, okay, we're not supposed to provide that need, by just, with them. We have to go through KPEP. If there's a legitimate need, then we'll meet that need through their case manager or through the program. And that's what I would encourage you to do. So we have a clothes pantry at the church that's mainly for KPEP. And people are donating clothes, and the guys that come to our church, they know about our clothes pantry, and they want things from that clothes pantry. And they'll ask our volunteers, well, can I get some of the clothes? And I have to tell them, no. You have to go through KPEP to get the clothes, because then what we do is give the clothes to KPEP. KPEP decides who gets the clothes based on need. And it's not just because they want it, it's, they decide who actually needs the clothes. So there's an appropriate way of dealing with residents at Wings of God, too. If they indicate they have needs, you can donate things without it being to a particular person or something, And then Cheryl, or the resident manager, will make sure that the needs are being met. Because there is that difference between needs and wants. And your residents don't often know that. You know, everything is immediate gratification, and they want it. And when KPEP really had, or Wings of God, will make the determination as to what our actual needs. So look at that volunteering and know the difference. Under the Code of Ethics, I'm not going to read that. We expect everyone to read it, understand it, and follow it. Confidentiality. This is vital in our program, is that anything that you share with the resident, or that is being shared with you, is confidential. You are not to go outside of Wings of God and talk about it specifically, naming names or anything like that, okay? Especially if you are assigned one, you know, if you're a mentor and you're assigned one resident, you don't want to be sharing a lot of things. You know, I share a lot of general, and Beth has shared some general things about incidents that have happened in our life, but you don't know who it was, okay? So make sure that you protect your residents and understand the importance of confidentiality. One of the forms in there, and that everyone should have signed this, if you haven't, is the confidentiality rules and regulations. We do need to have that signed and left on file with the office. So if you haven't signed that, make sure that you do. Do we have extra copies of that here to have them sign? Okay. The next form is this values form, and I want to go over this real quick, is that, and I'm speaking on behalf of the board of directors now, the values of the Wings of God. We have 3 levels here, and the base of this is the community. We take our impact and our position with Wings of God in the community very serious. We want to make sure, number one, the community is safe. And Karina does a very good job about really looking at the resident, risk factors and everything else, okay? So part of what our value is to make sure the community is safe, but we feel also that what we're doing for these residents is helping to make the community safe also, okay? So caring for everyone in the community and, you know, then building our support base. You guys are going to become ambassadors for Wings of God. As you leave here, you're going to be able to share with other people about the ministry of Wings of God. And I got to tell you, we had a big obstacle before we bought the house, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to open it, okay, originally, because it all was contingent on whether the village would approve a transitional house at the location. And all those things, all those requirements had to be met. We had some neighbors that were resistant, okay? And it really took us to get the community to stand behind us. And it ends up that the village and the residents around us love us now, because we're one of the few houses in the whole village that are investing and putting money into the house, making sure it's a good place, sound place for people to live. And the village is proud of what we've done. And so that was very important that we build our community base. The next one is the staff and the volunteers, everybody that's involved in the programming. We want to make sure everyone is safe. We want to make sure they're trained. We want to make sure that they're doing the right work. So we are a lot of value in how we make sure that everyone that's working with the residents is properly equipped and that they feel supported by the program and by the board of directors. And then the next one is the residents. You know, this is where everything points to is we really want to make a life change in their life and give them the idea of what it means to be a Christian. Some of them will make that decision. Some of them won't. But we feel that the seeds have been planted and change can happen. I guess we're fertilizing the soil maybe, okay, and putting a seed there and just hoping that somehow God will bless that person and make a difference in their life. So the values, you have that structure there. The next form that you have, one time I just did this verbally, and everyone said, no, there's too much good information there. I won't take time to go over that form there, but the 3 reasons we need professional boundaries and some guidelines for staying within the lines. You really need to understand, we're going to talk about setting boundaries now, but use this sheet here to give you reasons why those boundaries are necessary. And what I want to do now is talk about, Beth talked about the importance of having boundaries in your relationship with the resident. And one of the things I really want you to understand is boundaries are not like this board when you're dealing with our residents, that it's firm, stiff, and it's, you can't bend it, okay? Boundaries are more like this rope up here, and it moves. And I wish I could say every case is the same. It's going to depend on the resident, the individual. It's going to depend on you, how good you are at being able to maintain boundaries. So what you need to know is there's some flexibility in this, but use it cautiously, okay? So we're going to look at each of those knots as to different areas of boundaries that you need to. And the first one that we want to talk about is disclosure. How much information do you disclose? And this is talking about yourself. How much information do you tell them about your church, your church background, your religious beliefs? You could be Pentecostal, Methodist, and we all have differences. So how much are you supposed to disclose? And how much personal information are you supposed to disclose? If you're talking to someone about rearing children, you may want to use some experiences that you've had in your child care or raising a child. If you're talking about some experiences that you've had in the loss of a loved one or something, sharing those experiences are very valuable. But you want to make sure that you know what the boundaries should be, okay? And like I said, there's no steadfast rule on this. You really got to start, be aware of the manipulation factor and knowing how much you really should reveal to the other person. Gifts. We've talked about it, how much if somebody's asking you to give something to them. There's a book, and I was sharing with Chris here earlier about When Helping Hurts. It's a book that's sort of similar to this cross-cultural, knowing that sometimes you have good intentions, but giving something could be really more harmful than good. So you really need to understand that there are sometimes negative impacts about giving gifts. You can enable, and that it can cause problems in the house. If one of our mentors is just blessing her resident with all kinds of gifts and things, and the other ones aren't getting those kind of, gifts or whatever, it can create conflict between the residents and in the house. So we suggest that you don't give gifts to the individuals, that you go through the house manager and make it available to everybody. So if somebody wants to have a chocolate cake, it isn't just one resident gets the chocolate cake, everybody gets the chocolate cake, so that there isn't that conflict in the house created. If you have questions, this is the time you can raise them too as we go otherwise. Physical contact. We talked about this a little bit. And you need to understand that everyone has their comfort zone, okay, of how comfortable you are with interaction, physical interaction with other people. I don't mind a hug. Some people do, okay? So you don't want to ever assume because you like getting hugged that your resident may. I mean, they may be repulsed by it, okay? We had an incident at KPEP happen not too long ago where one of our leaders was leading the Bible study, and I don't know what he was doing, but he went up and just sort of put his hand on somebody, on one of the residents there. And this resident, I knew from my experience with him, had some emotional problems. And he just blew up. Don't touch me! And just started screaming. And this is while we're trying to do a Bible study. And the guy didn't mean anything but other than trying to demonstrate, the act of embracing somebody or something. And it was just done in a casual way, but it created a big incident. And so you can't assume that physical touch is appropriate. And you don't want to let them assume that it's okay with you either. All right? But you have to sometimes set those limits in your meeting with the client. Get to, just go ahead and ask. Is it all right to hug you after we get done today? Can I give you a hug? There's nothing wrong with asking that. Okay? And we're not saying you can't hug. But again, you got to be careful that they're not using that as a manipulation, that you make sure that you hold the boundary there too, that they don't use it to advance further manipulation. Time. This is an important one, is when, how often, and how long should you spend doing ministry with Wings of God? I mean, should I spend every Wednesday at 2 o'clock with my resident? If you're a mentor, you start having to weigh a lot of factors there and understand that whenever you spend time with this ministry or any ministry, you're usually robbing some other time from someplace, okay? And there's some considerations that you really have to have, and it's balance that's, I want to use as an illustration a chair to help you understand how to balance your life, okay? And there's 4 legs to any chair. And what I like to do is call it my life chair. And one of the legs in the chair is your social aspect of your life, is that we all have social contacts, relationships that are important, okay? And you have to make sure that you have a healthy balance there, okay, and that you do have social. But you also have physical needs, okay? What are some of our physical needs as human beings? Pardon? Sleep, rest, food, exercise. I mean, there's a lot of things in there that a lot of times we don't think about, and I don't want anyone robbing. Going to the gym is very important to me to maintain my physical health, okay? So I make sure I have time for that. But I also don't want to be, a fanatic about it and rob the other areas. I got to live a balanced life. Another area is your mental. And we talked here about reading. That's an important thing, is, there's ways that we can stimulate our mind. And some people, if you're just focusing on Wings of God and serving, and you're sort of ignoring these other areas, you're going to find you don't live a balanced life. So the challenge that I always want people to think about is maintaining some balance. So there's mental. What are you doing to stimulate your mind? Is it reading? Even watching the news. You'd be surprised how many, in my experience of dealing with criminal offenders, how many of them just check out of the world. If you asked them what's on the news, what's current events, they couldn't tell you one thing. Some of them I don't even know who the president is, okay? They just don't care. And to me, it's very important that you do what you can to stay involved, mentally involved in our society, because that young man that went into that school in Connecticut and shot those 20 kids and 6 adults, I don't know if you've heard the story about that, but they said he basically checked out a couple years ago. That when he came home, he locked himself in the basement and played those violent video games. He didn't go out and interact with people, okay? And that's sad. That's what happens to a lot of our people, is they just don't care about anybody else or the rest of the world. So mentally, we have to maintain some balance. The last one is our spiritual. And it's not that I didn't make spiritual the last because it's less important, but I don't think it's more important than these other areas either. To me, it's very important that we live a balanced life. And from my experience in my life, and that's why I call it my life chair, those 4 areas are very important for each of us to maintain. And for you to teach your, if you have contact with one of the residents, that those 4 aspects of every human life is so important to maintain. Now, let me ask, how many of you who got up and exercised today? Huh? Who did something relaxing this morning? What'd you do? Read your Bible. What'd you do? Anybody do anything that was like a sauna or anything like that? Huh? What'd you do? You took, was it a long, hot one? No. What'd you do?
I sat and talked with one of the residents.
Well, that's not relaxing.
It was relaxing. It is relaxing.
What'd you say you did?
I think you heard her.
What'd you say?
I had the steam of my coffee in my face.
Now that sounds good. So I got a tape here for you for relaxing moods, okay? It is important that you take care of yourself, okay? So whenever you get involved in ministry, you got to take care of yourself, okay? Make sure that you focus on yourself a little bit too, because this can drain you. Ask Karina. Ask Cheryl. Ministry can drain you, okay, if you allow it to. So maintain balance. Okay, we're down to role. What is your role? Beth talked about that great. Don't go outside of your role. If you are mentoring, you're not there to be anything else but a mentor. Make sure you recognize what your responsibilities are and stick to that role. And you might have to remind your resident that, well, that's outside my role. Or if they get into certain topics that you really don't feel experienced or knowledgeable about, get someone else to step in that role. If they're talking about heavy sexual abuse issues and that, don't try to take that on yourself. Refer them, contact one of the staff and let them make the proper referrals to discuss those issues. And the other thing is we don't want you to take advantage of the residents. If you're selling Mary Kay, your resident's not your customer, okay? Make sure you understand what your responsibilities are and you stick to it. Here's a good one, language. Your residents will sometimes may want to shock you with some of their vulgarity or whatever, okay? And it's like Beth said, sometimes it's just to see you react, okay? And you need to be prepared for that, okay? There are some people that talk like, I would never say some things that I've heard some people say, okay? Especially to a woman or anything. And yet, I had a boss that was like that, was the most vulgar person I ever heard. And, he had a master's degree and taught classes and everything else. And women would come in and just some of the words, I couldn't understand how somebody could talk like that, okay? So you need to try to make sure you check yourself. And if you're really uncomfortable with that, just clarify that with the person, okay? Is that, while we're doing this, please, can you, refrain from using that kind of language, okay? Because I really find it uncomfortable. You can set the boundaries on that. And clothing. There may be issues. We want to make sure that you adhere to a dress code. Now, KPEP has a dress code that, as a volunteer, we're expected to live by too. The residents aren't supposed to have T-shirts, and they're supposed to have their shirts tucked in. And I swore when I became retired I was never going to wear a tie and I was never going to tuck in a shirt. And today you see me with my shirt tucked in at least. But because KPEP residents are expected to dress like that, I try to dress the same as they are, okay? And if for some reason you should never dress inappropriately in a relationship with another client, you know, if you don't go in there with bikinis or halter tops and things like that. But if one of your residents tried to meet with you and you didn't feel it was appropriate, you know, you go there and it's in the morning and she comes down in her nightie or something and you don't think it's appropriate, just say, could you please go put on something a little more comfortable or something. So you can set the boundaries. Yeah. And the last one is space. Again, we all have our space that we're comfortable. And I've got this one guy at our church that he's partially deaf, or real deaf, I guess, but he just gets right to, I mean, he's so close. I mean, I don't have my wife come that close to me sometimes, you know. And it's sort of like I'm feeling so uncomfortable with it, okay? And you know what I'm talking about. So some people will use that as manipulation, but it's just natural the way they are. And you have a right to sort of set the boundary as to what your space, your comfort space is. And you sometimes have to clarify that, you know, with the person you're dealing with. And it's okay. Again, there's no hard, fast, solid rule. We're not going to do that to you, okay? Because everyone has certain abilities and how they can handle situations. Others need to have very tight rules, and you can make that determination what works best for you. Just make sure you look over what I provided you there in that one information sheet there that really, I think, gives you some good guidelines on how far to go with that. See if I can find that. Yeah, where it talks about problems with gifts and the 3 reasons we need professional boundaries and some guidelines for staying within those lines. Read that over. Now, I was talking with one of the participants today, and they said they really got to go home today and let some of this information soak in. We knew this was going to be fast-paced, but I really want you, especially with the first part, to just pray about it and read it back over and go over it again to just sort of get a sense of what God wants you to do and how he wants you to serve. Because serving is important as believers in Christ. We have to serve. Because if we're not, I don't think we're fulfilling what God called us to do. But we want to make sure we do it effectively and to the best of our ability. And that's hopefully what we've challenged you to today.